Well, g'day and welcome.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. That's a perfect start. Yes, well,
Very psychedelic, very psychedelic.
That's well, I thought we might as well. We've had this backdrop for a while. So for our listeners, we are joined today by Tania De Jong. Is that how you pronounce it?
Correct, Amundo.
I am. So Tania is one of Australia's most successful female entrepreneurs, performers and innovators, having developed 6 businesses and 3 charities over 3 decades. Tania works across public, private, creative and social sectors. She's joining us today to talk about her recently co-founded Mind Medicine Australia, which she did co-found with her husband, Peter Hunt AM. So Tania, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what is Mind Medicine?
Okay, sure. So my background, I'm a social entrepreneur, as you mentioned, and I'm a soprano. So yes, I sing for myself. And but lately I haven't been able to sing too much, which has been very depressing. But singing has always been my drug of choice. So I've always been, I think, fairly anti-drugs. I've also never smoked in my life. I've never got drunk, and I don't drink coffee. And so for me to actually be co-founder and executive director of Mind Medicine Australia, which is focused on psychedelic-assisted therapies, is not something that I expected to happen. But it did happen. And the way it happened was that I've always been really interested in, personal growth and spiritual development and so on. And so I've tried lots and lots of different things, hacking mind, body, spirit, and meditation, tantra, mantra, psychotherapy, myotherapy, cryotherapy, you name it, I've probably tried it. And so about 5 years ago, I came across a blog of Tim Ferriss. So I'd been reading his blogs every Friday. And in this one, he said that he was donating $100,000 to Imperial College for some trials on the use of psilocybin for depression. Well, I had no idea what psilocybin even was. And but because I work in the arts, I have a lot of friends who've been suffering with a whole range of different mental illnesses. And also my background is I'm the daughter and granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. So, my husband's father had committed suicide when he was 13. So we all carry trauma and carry stuff along with us, either our own or transgenerationally through our ancestors, or collective trauma as well, which many people are experiencing at the moment through the pandemic and many of the things that are happening as a result of that. And so I clicked on the link to an article by Michael Pollan in the New Yorker, which was way before he'd written his book, How to Change Your Mind. And it was called The Trip Treatment, the article, and it was about an end-of-life trial that was going on at New York University for patients who had a terminal diagnosis, were experiencing stress and anxiety, and they were using psilocybin-assisted therapy to treat those patients. And after just 2 treatments with psilocybin with a short course of psychotherapy, 80% of those patients had gone into remission, including a man who was profiled in this article, who happened to be a Jewish man, who had experienced transgenerational trauma through the Holocaust suffering of his family, similar to myself, except for, I don't have a diagnosable mental illness, but of course, I had some angst and some, different things. And I thought, I'd love to see what these treatments might do. And so I read the article and I said to my husband, you really should read this. I think we should try and get into one of the trials at Imperial College.
Yeah.
But there weren't any trials for healthy patients at the time we were going to Europe. And so they ended up referring us to a guide in the Netherlands, a private psychedelic assisted therapy guide. And we ended up having a really significant dose of Syrian rue followed by psilocybin. And Syrian rue acts as an MAOI inhibitor to stop the psilocybin from breaking down in the gut, so that you can really have a full ego dissolution and that you can experience the full impact of the psilocybin therapy. And really we were shot into space, into the multiverse, into many, many different dimensions. And
And sorry, just to be clear, for people who don't know, psilocybin itself is the psychoactive component within mushrooms. Well,
Magic mushrooms.
Magic mushrooms, right?
Certain kinds of mushrooms like psilocybin cubensis, you know, subgenerosa, and there's a whole range of species that have psychoactive properties. And, you know, I was completely unaware of most of this at the time that I underwent this experience. But suffice to say, you know, it was one of the most profound experiences in our lives. The sense of oneness, of connection was significant. You know, that feeling of being part of everything being part of you. This really expanded awareness and consciousness, and increased creativity that came off the back of that was also significant, and just feeling so much lighter. And I've never looked at anything, any human being or any part of nature in the same way ever since that experience. You know, every leaf, every flower, every seashell, every raindrop, you know, you start to see the fractilian nature of everything, and that we are all one. You know, the moment we're living in one of the most divisive, I think probably the most divisive time in history in terms of, you know, the polarization between people that have different viewpoints on every last thing. And I don't think there's been a time in history where we've been less united that I can, well, certainly not in my lifetime anyway. And, you know, historically, this is a very challenging period in human history. And it's so important, I think, for people to understand that we actually are all part of the one, and whatever we do affects everyone else. Oh. And so this was really profound for us and led to us doing lots and lots of research, meeting a lot of the researchers, scientists from around the world in this field. We started to go to a lot of events, and then we started to really understand that in Australia there was not really an ecosystem to make sure that these medicines and treatments could become part of our medical system. There wasn't really anything set up here for that. And so we then set up a charity, and this is our 5th charity. So Peter and I are both social entrepreneurs and philanthropists, and he's previously set up women's community shelters around New South Wales, and I had founded the Song Room and Creativity Australia and the With One Voice program, which are 2 national charities. And so this became our joint project to set up Mind Medicine Australia, really with a goal to expand the treatment options available to doctors and their patients, and to reduce the suffering and suicides that are occurring, because we have such a huge and growing mental health emergency in this country. And it's of course getting much worse now, and especially due to the lockdowns and, you know, some of the other measures that are being taken. And our goal really is to make sure that these treatments become accessible and available through the medical system to practitioners, to anyone, no matter where they're based or their financial circumstances. And what is really important to say is that in our research, and people can see the research on our website, mindmedicineaustralia.org, we're a registered charity, and you can see some of the extraordinary research which shows that after just 2 to 3 medicinal treatments with a short course of psychotherapy, 60 to 80% of patients are going into remission from treatment-resistant depression, major depressive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, addictions, and so on. Whereas current treatments, you're getting, you know, a maximum of about 35% remission rates from existing treatments like antidepressants for depression, plus all the side effects. And in the case of post-traumatic stress disorder, the remission rates are as low as 5%. So we're seeing like outcomes in treatment of mental health that have never been seen. And sadly, these actual outcomes were being seen in the 50s and 60s when over 50,000 patients were treated in medically controlled environments with these medicines and therapies, and were healed from a whole range of conditions. There was relationship therapy, there was obsessive compulsive disorder, there was, you know, eating disorders, and a whole lot of other things which are now being researched again. But in 1971, Nixon had his war on drugs and effectively made this whole class of medicines illegal, and they became prohibited, and that stopped all the research in the space and meant that effectively we've had a lost 50 years where loneliness, social isolation, mental illness, disconnection have really increased. And there's just been no treatments to really help the majority of people get well.
Sure. So I was going to then, obviously, I don't know if you've heard of Jordan Peterson.
Absolutely.
So Jordan Peterson has spoken a bit about psychedelic treatments and about how in some of the studies, it suggests that the people who do take substantial doses or go on substantial trips almost invariably list that trip as one of the 3 most profound experiences of their entire life. So up there with the birth of their child, marriage, death of parents.
Absolutely.
They think it's absolutely one of the top 3. And then one of the other things he talks about is exactly what you were talking about was, for example, in smokers, something like 70 to 80% of smokers were able to completely come off cigarettes, and that there's basically nothing else in terms of comparable cessation like psychedelics in terms of treating those type of
and actually there's just well, amazingly enough too, there's just been this recent trial that's been done with alcohol addiction, and in that trial pretty much I think nearly all the patients were able to stop their addiction. And what was even more remarkable was that they were able to still socially drink without then becoming addicts again, which is because they actually got to the root cause of their trauma that was actually causing the addiction. So addiction is never, usually it's not the problem that the person has, it's the trauma underneath the addiction, which is causing the trauma. And what these medicines do is they get to the root cause of a person's trauma and suffering, which is why they're curative. Whereas most of the treatments that are around at the moment are, palliative. They're just managing a condition, often numbing out a patient's both highs and lows. And they come with a whole range of other side effects, and they're quite difficult to withdraw from as well. So it is amazing to have a class of medicines that is curative and that can get people well and in a lasting way. And one of the other things about recent trials is they show increasing remission rates. So to give you, if you'd like, I could talk about just 2 of the most recent incredible trials. Would that be valuable?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
So there's been 2 recent trials that have just come out, one by Imperial College that directly compares psilocybin-assisted therapy with antidepressants. And half of the group of people who were all suffering with treatment-resistant depression, half of the group had 2 doses of psilocybin, of course, under, clinical supervision, with a short course of psychotherapy. And the other group had a daily antidepressant, escitalopram, with a short course of psychotherapy. And at the end of the trial, which went for 6 weeks, the remission rates in the psilocybin group were twice as high as in the antidepressant group. Also, the recovery rate from their depression was quicker. They had less side effects, less suicidal ideation. So that was really significant. The second trial is the first part of the phase 3 trials conducted by MAPS under the supervision of the FDA, which is the US regulators. And in that trial, after just 3 medicinal sessions with MDMA, combined with a short course of psychotherapy, the patients who had been suffering for 14 years on average of post-traumatic stress disorder, so you can imagine the suffering. 67% of them went into a remission immediately. 88% had statistically significant results. And they're expecting that with further integration with the therapists and the patients, that they could get to 80% remission rates on that trial. So now part 2 of that trial is taking place. And if that continues to show these sorts of results, then MDMA will become a prescribable medicine in the US. Soon after will be following, and that will be followed, with Europe, Australia, also making this into a prescribable treatment. Psilocybin is expected to also become a prescribable treatment, is in phase 2B trials in a number of places around the world. So we're seeing some rapid movement now towards legalization of these treatments. Some states in the US, for example, are legalizing psilocybin-assisted therapy for treatment of a range of psychiatric conditions. Canada's legalizing psilocybin to treat people with end-of-life stress and PTSD and so on. And even the Australian government, has recently announced a $15 million grant which is for research and development and innovative research, not just to replicate what's gone overseas, but to, do some new research in Australia as well.
Sure. So the current status of those therapies in Australia currently, they are currently illegal for even prescriptive medicinal purposes.
Not quite. So they are illegal as they're a Schedule 9 substance. So to all of you listening out there, unfortunately, you can't go out and get a treatment right now. But there are some approvals going through the TGA called SASB approvals, where a psychiatrist or prescribing doctor can apply to the TGA on a case-by-case basis for a patient who's really suffering, suicidal, could be a veteran or someone else, who is treatment resistant for psilocybin or MDMA-assisted therapies. Psilocybin for treatment of depression, MDMA for treatment of PTSD. And over 40 of those approvals have been granted in Australia so far. One psychiatrist who is a veteran has received 12 approvals to treat 12 veterans. But unfortunately, those approvals are happening federally at a state level. The states are not recognising these substances as medicines. They're still seeing them as recreational substances, and they're not granting medical exemptions for those patients to actually be treated with those medicines. So the medicines are not being allowed to be brought in to treat those patients, which is pretty horrific when you think about it, when you think that this is potentially the last hope for many of these patients who are really suffering.
Why do you think that is that they're not progressing when the federal government has kind of given a soft go ahead, I guess?
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of issues between the federal government and our states, which we are seeing at the moment through the pandemic. That's one of the reasons, because the states are always, the states don't have to do what the federal government wants. So that's part of it. But part of it is that because the medicines are still in Schedule 9, the states, for whatever reason, just don't make the distinction between the use of a substance recreationally or for medical purposes in medically controlled environments.
Yeah.
It's very important to say, that no patient's ever going to get to take these medicines home. They're all going to undertake treatment in a clinic under the supervision of trained therapists, and we're training all the therapists through our certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies. So we're training, hundreds of psychiatrists, GPs, psychologists, social workers, nurses, and others. So it's not like, there's going to be some opening of the floodgates.
You just get to take it home and do whatever you want.
No. But it's this old thing of the word pharmakon. Pharmakon is a Greek word, and it can mean poison or medicine. And unfortunately, I think the states still see these substances as poisons, when in fact, as a medicine, if you use something, with the right intention, with the right setting, for the right purposes under supervision, then it is a medicine. Yeah. And so we have recently, about a year and a bit ago, we applied to the TGA for the rescheduling of MDMA and psilocybin from Schedule 9, which is a prohibited substance of no value and dangerous. Yeah. Obviously, these medicines are not at all dangerous. There's been no adverse events whatsoever in thousands of patients in hundreds of trials, let alone in the 50s and 60s where, 50,000 patients were treated. And these medicines are even considered very safe in recreational environments. But, we applied to the TGA to reschedule them from Schedule 9 to Schedule 8, which is controlled medicine. And once the medicines are in Schedule 8, which is controlled medicine, still a doctor will have to get an approval both federally and at the state level to treat a patient. But it will make those state barriers much more difficult to put up, because there will need to be some kind of national standardization. You can't have a situation where some states have a permit system to allow medicines to be brought in and others don't. I mean, it's a little like what's happened with euthanasia, right? So, have some states that, you can, use euthanasia, and some states you can't. Remarkable, isn't it, that, you have laws that now allow people to end their lives, but you don't have laws that allow them to have access to medicines that could save and heal their lives.
It is strange. I guess it is. There is kind of an older dogma towards psychedelic substances that is kind of devoid a little bit of reason and rationality. I mean, you look at, for example, marijuana. Can't really remember the last time there was a marijuana overdose, but we can see plenty of times where people have drunk themselves to death and drunk driven. And
well, absolutely. And you know, a lot of the relative drug harm studies, like Uni of Melbourne did one in 2019, and it shows the relative drug harms of all drugs as reported on by emergency staff, you know, psychiatrists and others in emergency wards and hospitals. And by far the most dangerous drug to self and others is alcohol, whereas down the other end of the spectrum, you've got psilocybin and MDMA. And this is for recreational environments, you know. So it is
a bit strange, and it's definitely, this is why I think, you know, I find it so interesting, but also I find kind of the psilocybin story historically extremely interesting, and that's why we've got the mushroom with the snake wrapped around it. There is quite a bit of historical conjecture that the Bible was in large part responsible, or was the magic mushroom, the Amanita muscaria, was in large part responsible for the creation of the Bible. There are a lot of people who say that the Amanita muscaria is actually also Santa Claus as well, and that old shaman story. More, I guess, something interesting, like, do you remember that trip that you went on? Could you describe it to us?
Yeah, I mean, like being on a incredible roller coaster, but I was lying on my back, you know, on a bed, you know, I was safely guided by a wonderful guide. And I do want to say to everyone, you know, if you are seeking out these experiences for your own mental health or your own therapeutic purposes or personal growth or whatever you're seeking it for, creativity and so on, it really is a good idea to do it with someone else holding the space for you. I really just want to say that to everyone out there. You'll feel safer. You know, perhaps some of your insights and some of your responses might be able to also be conveyed to you by that sitter. So it is a good idea. But yeah, I just remember like literally I was traveling in astral planes, I was in rivers, I was in oceans. I saw a lot of collective suffering as well, you know, partly through my own background, through the Holocaust stuff, but way back, I mean, things I've never seen in my own life. You know, I saw a lot of imagery, incredible visuals. But overall, I just got this sense of this everlasting light, this incredible beauty, and just what it is to be alive, you know, what it means to be a human being in this carnation, what a privilege that is for any of us who are lucky enough to have a human birth. And I just wish that everyone could find that light. And I think these medicines do offer an enormous amount of hope for people who are suffering with darkness and despair, you know, to get out of that black hole. It's so hard to actually explain these experiences to people because there's a lot of stuff that is ineffable, you know, you can't really put words to something that is so magnificent. Like some of the images I've seen, like just incredible. And you see some of the psychedelic art that is around, and I've seen that stuff, you know.
Yeah. A lot of people also, I think Jordan Peterson was talking about when they go on these trips as well, a lot of them almost describe exactly the same thing. Like a lot of people have almost exactly the same imagery. There are elves, there are trees, there are these type of things which speak to them. I don't know. Do you have any kind of a position on what does it reveal? Like kind of, a deeper level of consciousness, like a shared level of consciousness? Like some people say that kind of, and you know, I haven't been on a trip or anything, but I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's, you know, super interesting, especially the reports of people seeing exactly the same thing. I find that super strange and super fascinating. Like, how do you explain that? Do you think that it is kind of like a way to reach God or a way to reach kind of a higher level of consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, I'd say that, you know, what everyone experiences in these, I mean, I know there are some commonalities in some trips, but for example, what my husband and I experience any time that we've worked with these medicines has been entirely different every single time.
Yeah.
And no time has been like the previous time, if you know what I mean. So, but what I think firstly, what it's indicating is that we're nowhere near seeing what is really here on this material plane. You know, like we're not seeing everything that is present.
Yeah.
That's one thing I would say. Secondly, I think it really helps you to understand that spirits, you know, that when people pass from this particular material plane, it doesn't mean that their spirit is not still present in some shape or form here. And there's many famous seers and gurus who've worked with these medicines, like Ram Dass was one of those. You know, his guide Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba, he would often say to his followers, you know, when I die, they were all really sad when he was really ill that he was going to die. And he said, don't worry, you know, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to still be here, you know. And so I think that what these medicines do is, in a sense, they create, it sounds ridiculous, I mean, but this passageway or this stairway between heaven and earth. I've actually done an album called Heaven on Earth and a few songs that have really come to me like out of these incredible ceremonies and sessions, and I just get such inspiration. And I would have to say that there's just so much more to all of this than what we're seeing normally. And you know, and I think that once people see that, it's really hard. Like one of the things that I've experienced as a result of this is, like, I've never really liked insects, like particularly spiders, but I've never really killed spiders, but even ants and stuff. I can't even step on an ant now, you know, like, you know, and you know, like I don't want to eat meat. I mean, I've never really loved meat that much anyhow, but it's not like I don't want to do stuff that is, I don't want to do things to other sentient beings, no matter what they are. I want to preserve nature. I think from an environmental perspective, working with these medicines really does help you to become more environmentally conscious and socially conscious too. Like you just want to do, I think, but I want to just help people more. You know, not only do I want people to have these experiences in a supervised, and certainly, I mean, we're focused on medically controlled environments, but I do absolutely recognise that people will seek out these experiences until these medicines are legal, because people want to get well, you know, and so a lot of people go underground for these treatments, or indeed above ground, as someone said to me yesterday on another podcast. Well, yeah, you can just go out, but you've just got to know what you're picking, and you still want to have supervision, you know. And it's just really important to say to people that, you know, these are illegal. So
careful.
We don't condone illegal use of these medicines, but we do understand that people are going to search out treatments, and that's, you know, that is a human right, really. There is a right to well-being. There is a right to medicines that will heal you and improve your life as well. So there are many different types of, I suppose, parallel areas that we're working on at Mind Medicine Australia to make sure that these treatments become available to people.
Sure. So what's
legally,
yeah. Caveat. So then what's next for Mind Medicine? What's on the horizon? And, you know, how can people, I guess, get in touch / support Mind Medicine?
Yeah, look, you know, so we're building the ecosystem for these medicines to be available, accessible to anyone in Australia. And we're doing that through 4 key strategic pillars. The first of those is education and awareness building. So we do that through a whole range of events, and also, you know, webinars and podcasts like these as well. But we have a global webinar series with some leading presenters that sometimes attract thousands of people from around the world. We have a global summit in November, which we encourage people to join. There'll be virtual options with that as well. Secondly, we also have partnered webinars where we will present with clinical groups. We'll present to hundreds or thousands of psychiatrists, GPs, health insurers, universities, hospitals, businesses, people who are interested in learning more. So if there's people in your audience who would like a presentation from our psychiatrists, psychologists, and our team, we'd be more than happy to help present those sort of webinars. We've also started over 30 chapters in Australia and New Zealand to ensure that at a grassroots level, communities can educate and build awareness in their own communities and really focus on the data and science.
Yeah.
So once you focus on the data and science, it's really hard for people to keep hanging on to the old prejudice and stigma, And so often within 20, 30 minutes of a presentation to very skeptical doctors or psychiatrists, they'll come up to us and they'll say, wow, this is incredible. How do I get access for my patients? And then they start joining our certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies or start attending our events and so on because they want to learn more.
Yeah.
We also have started the first ever certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies in the Southern Hemisphere. And we're in the second intake of that at the moment, and the demand is through the roof from a range of practitioners around Australia and New Zealand as well in that course. So that's pretty exciting. And we also have other professional development courses. We have an online 4-part webinar series that's starting in mid-September, not only for practitioners, but for interested people in the fundamentals of psychedelic-assisted therapies. A lot of students also looking for what is the career path to become a psychedelic-assisted therapist?
Yeah.
A lot of people want to be a psychedelic-assisted therapist. And then we've also started working with some universities towards setting up an Asia Pacific Centre in emerging mental health therapies for applied research and development, manufacturing of the medicines, rollout of clinics and stuff. And then the fourth part of our strategy is really around setting up the ethical and legal frameworks to make sure that, these treatments can be accessible to those who need them wherever they are, with the right protocols, with the right safeguards, and to make sure that, we're still getting those at least 60 to 80% remission rates that have been, achieved through 160 recent trials.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're pretty libertarian on this channel, and we think that there's kind of, the case is pretty strong, definitely, for legalization at the very minimum from a medicinal and therapeutic basis. I mean, considering people can drink themselves to death basically at the pub, we don't really see
and then go and run someone over,
someone over. I mean, I think you should be allowed to potentially smoke a doob and watch Lord of the Rings or do whatever you want. But I think it's absolutely fantastic what you're doing. Keep at it. We love it. And we look forward to tracking your progress, because I mean, this is kind of it seems to come in waves, ebbs and flows. Legalization of marijuana, legalization of psychedelics to a lesser extent, I think, but definitely marijuana is kind of at the forefront. I think we're making slow progress, but I definitely want to keep tabs on what My Medicine is doing. I think you're doing a great job, and we'd love to hear from you again soon.
No, thank you. And I don't know if Liana sent it to you, but I'll send you some gifts of some of my songs and stuff, and you might want to include one with the podcast.
Absolutely. Splice it in. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. She sent it across. She's doing a good job.
Thank you. And do put our website. I'll send you some links to share out with your community as well.
Perfect. No, thank you so much, Tania. I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thanks so much for having us, and keep up the beautiful work.
Thank you.
And the backdrop, just love it.
I will pass it on. My sister painted it. I'll pass it on.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much.
Take
care.